All right, welcome to the Veterans Club podcast. This is Jeffrey Rosales alongside Lakeisha Mosley and Joe Palacios. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July weekend, a day to celebrate freedom. I know we had a lot of barbecues going on, a lot of fireworks going on here in San Diego, and I hope you and your families had a great time. I'm really excited about this next episode that we have today, very special episode because we are celebrating independence. And there's an organization that, some of you might have heard about. It's called the Marine Corps. Well, it had a lot to do with celebrating our independence, right? And I'm excited about having this next guest because he is leading the charge on reviving the birthplace of the Marine Corps in Tavern, Philadelphia. Now, let me tell you a little bit about him. Patrick Dailey served in the Marine Corps in the 1980s. And after that, he served in industry, in the construction and pharmaceutical industry. He sits on many boards. He is a Philadelphia native, so go Eagles. And he is the founder of the Tun Legacy Foundation, who's on a mission to restore the birthplace of the Marine Corps. And I'm fired up about it because I want to be a part of that mission. And I hope you guys are as that, because this is history, ladies and gentlemen. So Patrick Dailey, welcome to the Veterans Club.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So Patrick, like I said, I noticed that you are in HQ of the Tavern Legacy Foundation, and I can't wait to get into that. So, a lot of us are business owners here or own nonprofits. A lot of us probably work from home, and I love that you're there, boots on the ground, and doing the work for the Tavern Legacy Foundation. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about who Pat was before he joined the service. Tell us where you grew up. What was it like?
All right. Well, I was born in Philadelphia. I was raised just outside the city, just a few minutes from the border. Philadelphia is the second largest city on the East Coast. A lot of people don't realize that. And the greater Philadelphia area is, I think, the fourth largest in the country because of the ring of suburbs around the city. And, it's a very old, obviously a very old city. So these small towns that ring Philadelphia have been here, a lot of them be older than Philadelphia. So it's quite a, metropolitan area. But like everyone else, I went to high school and finished high school, didn't quite know what I wanted to do. So I went to a Philadelphia area college. Got done 4 years of college. Got a degree in business management. Decided to take another year and get an additional degree in accounting. And then, I still wasn't ready to sit down and sit in an office and push paper around. Kind of wanted adventure. And so I saw as you will often do, you see these recruiting posters around. And my father had served in World War II in the Navy. My uncles had been in the Navy. My brother was in the Army in Vietnam. But my knowledge of the military was very, very limited. And so I went to the nearest Marine Corps the nearest recruiting office, not the Marine Corps one. And I talked to all the services. And to be honest, the Marine Corps scared me the most. The other services say, yeah, what size coat do you wear? Yeah, we'll get you a coat. And then, we'll make you a second lieutenant, and then you go to officer training school, and yada yada. And the Marines were like, no, you got to try out. You got to go to OCS, Officer Candidate School, and then after 10 weeks, we'll let you know. So I thought, all right, well, it can't kill me, I don't think, and I wanted the challenge. So I volunteered for OCS, and I showed up with certainly hair over my ears, and showed up. I had been able to run a mile before I got on that bus, so I was ready to go. I had run a mile, and they shipped me off to Quantico, and that was an awakening. I think OCS is a little different than Paris Island and San Diego, because at OCS, when I went through it, there were 3 cuts. So there were 3, after every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever, they would see who wasn't measuring up and send them home. And you could always just say, no, this is not for me, and drop. So, and I went through what's called OCC, which was a mix of prior enlisted Marines and people just, didn't have any sort of ROTC scholarships, just volunteering for the Marine Corps. So it was a really good mix of Marine veterans, enlisted veterans who helped us pass inspections and all this other stuff. Quite a few college athletes, college football players from big name schools. And still, we lost more than 40% of the guys just in my platoon that we started with in OCS from either broken legs or dropping out or whatever, just not being able to keep up. So I recall, it's in Virginia, it's in the summertime. And I recall in June sitting in a hot, they have these, they call them Butler buildings. They're basically big steel buildings like barns, and they just cook. And that's where your classrooms are. So, you sit in there and they have fans and you're cooking in this building in the Virginia sun. And this big gunnery sergeant stands up, and this must have been our second week there. And we're all, shaved heads. And it was our first class, and it was history of the Marine Corps. And, I'd been away 2 weeks by now. And this guy stands up and says, United States Marine Corps was born in Philadelphia. And, oh, how about that? I didn't know that. That's interesting. And then he did a Tun Tavern, and he gave the address. And I thought, no, wait a minute. I used to drive trucks for my father, and I knew the waterfront like the back of my hand. I had, in Philly, that's often where you did drag racing down there on Friday and Saturday nights. It's kind of a very industrial area. There was no Tun Tavern. I'd eaten in taverns. I'd eaten, drinking down there, whatever. There was no Tun Tavern. But I knew at this point in my 2-week Marine Corps career, I was not going to correct a gunnery sergeant about Tun Tavern. Certainly not, not in a room full of 500 other officer candidates. So I just took it all in, and time went on, and I remember I probably wasn't paying attention all that much, but I learned later in that class that the first amphibious assault by Marines was down in the Bahamas, and I thought, there's plenty of British in Philadelphia and Boston. Why did they go to the Bahamas to look for a fight? That didn't make any sense to me. So it's just stuff you file away in your head, and so life goes on. I made it through OCS, and I got commissioned, and then another year in basic school, it's called, where you learn how to do everything in the Marine Corps, just enough to make you dangerous. And the Marine Corps is so small that you can be expected to be plugged in on almost any billet as an officer, and do it with some competence. And that's, I think, the idea behind basic school. So then I went out to the fleet, and I got sent to the 3rd Marine Division and supported 9th Marines. I was there for 2 years and in Okinawa, and I started to study Japanese while I was there. I thought it was an interesting way to meet people. And then I transferred to the wing and served 2 years with the 1st Air Wing down in Futenma, and continued to study Japanese, and got actually picked up with the Japanese Army with a Marine Officer Exchange Program on 3 occurrences with the Japanese military. So I saw a bit of Japan. Okinawa, as Marines will know, is the subtropics. So even in the dead of winter, it gets all the way down to 50 degrees there. But Japan's all one time zone, and where the Japanese Army trains is up north in Hokkaido, near the Arctic Circle. So here I was going from 60-degree days to 20-degree days, literally the next day, up to my waist in snow and whatever. But they were good experiences, and I really did enjoy them. And then I met a girl from Japan and married her, and we came back. And Marine Corps is great life for a single guy, but especially when your spouse does not really speak English well. I decided it was time to get out of the Marine Corps, and I transitioned back to Philadelphia and started my career as in business. First working for an insurance company for a couple of years, and then in the construction industry, and later in the pharmaceutical industry as a financial controller. So that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Yeah, I was going to say, man, there's a lot to unpack there that you talked about. We were born in a bar. So your comment earlier about, the invasion happening somewhere, I think in the Bahamas and the Caribbean. If we're bored in a bar, it doesn't matter. Just put us on the ship and we will go wherever we are directed. That is the way of the Marine Corps. We adapt and overcome. And I like that you talked about the cultural exchange you had. And also, I want to give a shout out to Marines who are watching and listening today. Hiram Figueroa, he's a great. He's a great Marine, and he's someone who is well known, and he is blasting this out to all the fellow Marines here. So shout out to Hiram Figueroa. Thank you for listening today, brother. Appreciate it for learning and taking the time here to sit with Pat. So Pat, I want to get into a couple things, right? Your military service. So you joined. What did you learn from the Marine Corps that you are now applying? Is it the JJ did tie buckle? And I'm not even going to repeat that acronym because that is so long. And by the time I'm done with it, the show will be over. But I think those leadership principles, like you said, right? Because I want people to take this away. Take one takeaway from this is the Marine Corps does really well in leadership principles, right? So you see a lot of Marines coming out and we are ready to take charge of things, right? I think Pat just demonstrated what he mentioned is you can put a Marine anywhere and they'll take charge of anything. I had a Marine actually who told me, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he said like 100 of the Fortune 500 CEOs were Marines, right? Just saying, I'm not bragging about it, but I'm just saying a lot of Marines know how to take charge, right? And when I say take charge, meaning leadership, right? So I'm sure leadership is one of your takeaways. But what else did you take away from your service that you apply now to your life, whether it's in business, your relationships, career?
I guess it's the confidence of not fearing failure, because failure is just not considered an option, and also in the daily grind of trying to get this thing done, or just in the daily grind of work and meeting people. Meeting another Marine is often like seeing a cousin somewhere, and it's that we're so small that it's unusual to find another Marine, and there's a bond there, and then you don't want to let another Marine down, and that's always in the back of my head about when we're working on this project. I don't want to let these other guys down that are helping me do this. They're not all Marines, but certainly that is something that weighs heavy on my head. And a funny comment I found funny, or eye-opening comment. One of the gentlemen on our board, he's not a military guy. He's a IT guy, but that's why he's here, because he can help us with the IT part of this, and he has good connections. But he's like, "You guys are amazing. Nothing scares you, does it?" So I don't know. People shooting at me would scare me, but he just he said, like, "I would never do this project. This is frightening to do this." He said, "It's amazing. Yeah. You guys are just sitting around like nothing frightens you." So,
Pat, did you tell him except not having a haircut on Monday morning? That's
yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Anyway, but yeah, so that's really what drives me to do this, and with the Tun Tavern thing, after a couple of years of me thinking like, this is crazy, let's just do this. And so you just get to the point where, like, you know what, I'm just going to do this. And there's plenty of doubters when you start out, and it starts out very small, and it's just 2 or 3 people who encourage you to do this. And then it snowballs, and that's where we are now. It's snowballing.
I actually made I was actually talking to a friend who going through a life transition earlier today for whatever reason. I actually said to him, I was like, I've really come to believe that you can't take this journey alone, and you require multiple villages along the path, right? So it's building those relationships. But before we get too far into this, I wanted to come back because I don't think people recognize, and you both mentioned it, the amount of history that the Marine Corps teaches, both now I'm recognizing on the officer side as well as the enlisted side. The amount of history and tradition that we get during basic training when we first come in is just insane. Because as you were talking about it, right? Tun Tavern, we were born in a bar. Philadelphia, New Providence, Rhode Island was the first amphibious landing. Just the amount of things. Like, and for instance, today I'm actually in honor of we lost a Marine from my first unit in the Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, right? I actually ended up in that military unit because of the amount of history and tradition that they teach you in basic. They messed my orders up. I actually wanted to go to 3rd Marines in Hawaii, right? Because I wanted to travel.
Don't we all?
Right? But when the drill instructor said Palacios, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, I was like, wait a minute, that's the most decorated unit in the Marine Corps. They've been in every battle. They earned us the devil dog. Like, all of this history just came, and I just stayed quiet. Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir. So I ended up going to this unit. So I just don't I think other services, and I'm not sure because I didn't go to basic and other services, if they have as much tradition, but I think there's something to that build that ethos and that esprit de corps, which allows Marines. You could walk down the street and some guys, like, you'll see an Eagle Globe and Anchor tattoo, or you'll see some type of target indicator that this guy is a Marine. You just immediately have a bond to start with, and then depending on the character of the person, it can erode from there. But again, right. It's like you immediately have like this, okay, well, that guy did some of the same stuff. He knows, he holds some of the same honor, courage, and commitment type of traditions that have been instilled in me. And there's like this trust. So I think people don't, that is a big thing about being in the Marine Corps. I think that, at least for me, that's always stood out, about how much history and tradition that they instill in us. So anyway, I was just wanted to, but I wanted to ask you about basic school. When you went to basic school, that's the equivalent of back in the day when I was in, because I'm an old guy too. We had to do both Marine combat training on the enlisted side, which MCT, and then I still had to go to the infantry school, right? Advanced Infantry Battalion. Is that the same? So in other words, basic school is similar to MCT. So all MOSs of officers will go to basic school to learn those big kind of infantry.
Basically, I mean, the idea of basic school is that you learn every job in the Marine Corps. You learn how to call in artillery, the basics of that, and identify aircraft, and you learn enough, as we used to joke, to be dangerous, because theoretically they could plug you in, and the terminology will be familiar to you already. You may not know which radio to use for a high frequency thing, but you'll recognize the name because you had to memorize that particular radio nomenclature back in basic school. And, you learn enough to at least hit the ground running. If you're assigned to to lead an MOS platoon, a platoon in an MOS that you're not trained in, at least you can fake your way through it, kind of thing. So it's probably not the official explanation, but it's unique to the Marine Corps. It's no other service does that, as far as I know. It's we know just enough to make ourselves dangerous, a little bit about everything. So,
and I think that's one of the values, one of the differences about having Marines on your team is that they've done that to all of us, enlisted and officer. They give us the idea of enough information on all these different type of systems of operation and TTPs, all these kind of broad spectrum, enough that we can be familiar in anything, but also to have the confidence to go, well, I'll figure it out. I just need to find the right resources. And I think that's a huge value. And how much of that have you used throughout your life in transition?
Actually, I never thought about it, but yeah, probably quite a bit of it. It's you learn how to adapt and overcome, as they say, and just you kind of cut through the noise and understand what it is that's trying to be accomplished here, and march in that direction, kind of thing. So that's something that I never really thought about, but it's kind of in your DNA at this point.
Yeah, I think that's so important from a mindset perspective, right? Like what I love about the Corps, and I'm just using the Corps here as an example, is you can have a Marine go and set up an operation, and if that Marine gets taken out, there's another Marine ready to take over. And it's like if nothing ever happened, right? It's like the operation keeps going because we have that continuity and we have that process and we have those leadership principles on how to adapt and overcome. So it sounds like when you transitioned pretty successfully, I would say. It's like you weren't. I don't think there were any struggles. I'm sure you did struggles. There might have been some challenges. Can you talk more about that? Like, was like, because what I want my veterans here, especially to know is, especially in the Veterans Club, Pat, what we like to show is like your challenges, and then of course like how you overcame that, right? Which I'm sure you did, because look what you're doing now.
I mean, transitioning out of the Marine Corps into civilian life.
Correct.
Is that what you mean? Yeah,
Yep.
and it was, people joke about the military, and especially the Marine Corps, but I remember it dawning on me like, wow, the Marine Corps really does work really well. I mean, everything works because everyone is following orders, and it's none of this like, why do I have to do that kind of stuff? It's like, no, get this done. And we had a really good CO when I was in OCS. He said, if you tell your troops whenever you can do it, if you tell your men why they're doing something, when you don't have time to tell them, they'll just do it because they trust you. And so I've sort of kind of lived with that. If you have the time to explain why it is you're doing something, why it's important that we do this, when those times when you don't have time to explain it, intuitively the team will trust you. So the transitioning from the Marine Corps, where everything worked very well, to civilian life, where all that stuff drops away from you, and they didn't have the safety nets back then that they do now, because it was relatively peacetime, and we had Beirut and when I was in Grenada, but nothing on the scale of Iraq or Afghanistan, of course. So there weren't that many tens of thousands of guys getting out at the same time, but you're just sort of left to kind of figure it out, and some civilian recruiters, they kind of have a military section run by ex-military guys, but it was, all that stuff kind of drops away, and when I went through this, but it's that resilience where, like, put your big boy pants on. It's time to just man up and get it done. So no use crying about it. Like we used to say in the Marine Corps, excuses are like, well, noses. Everybody's got one. It wasn't noses, but.
Yep. No. So I think for my veterans out here, like, I think what Patrick just hit the nail on the head here is, hold yourself accountable. And the civilian world is like, one thing that my recruiter always told me is the Marine Corps is what you make out of it. So now when I got out, the civilian world is what I make out of it, because I have held to that motto ever since. And I think what Patrick is talking about here is veterans. It's, if you need help, reach out to one of us and we will guide you along the way, or give you, or connect you with someone here. But Patrick was able to use his skills and principles that he used in the service, and he was able to use that to adapt to the civilian world, right? Which is why he landed in insurance first, and then in the construction and the pharmaceutical industry, right? The world is your oyster, veterans. You can make it however you see it. So I think that's a very important fact, and I want folks to take that away, at least for today. So I want to pitch it over to Lakeisha, because I don't want to make this all Marine Corps. I want to make it very diverse here, right? As far as all of our other services that we have in the Army and the Navy. Shout out to you guys, because you guys are important too. But I want to give the floor over to Lakeisha for any questions or comments.
Absolutely, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. I definitely love the Marines. Marines are my friends. But at the same time, we all work together, right? So my question to you, Pat, just with everything that you have built, and, just in your business and, connection with the service members and with your family, a lot of times we go through a lot of anxiety and adversities, and we deal with it, especially being service members. We have to bounce back. We would go ahead and persevere over. Sometimes we are not able to do it. So I want to talk about that, that process. What is your process when you're not able to feel resilient? When you feel like you can't move forward, do you have a strategy, for yourself? Like, do you go for, a jog or walk, or do you journal? What do you do in order for you to move forward so you can bounce back effectively for yourself?
I mean, I continue to run as I was not a runner when I went in the Marine Corps. As I said, I was able to run a mile as I joined the Marine Corps. They quickly fixed that. And so I just continued running as I got out. I mean, I'm not a marathoner. I run between 3 and 5, sometimes 10 miles, but that's a good head clearing exercise for me, and a good way to keep stress levels down. And, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's, the Marine Corps teaches you a way to like figure it out. And it's just, you can't, I don't know, you're not taught to depend on others to fix things. Like, figure it out. And, plans go to crap, but you got to get this mission done. You got to, the end result is all we're working towards. So, if you got to take a job in the meantime, that's not making the wage that you needed to make, figure it out. Take that job and get started and keep looking. You stay hungry and don't. We have skills, I think, that we don't even realize we have, that employers have pointed out to me, and I wasn't even conscious I was doing it. I mean, certain things about, lines on lines, as we say in the Marine Corps, things have to line up, just because it looks more military and more. It's just, the neatness part of it, the keeping things squared away. That is just skills that is in your DNA that you take with you.
Yeah, I really like that, Pat. Honestly, it's a mindset, and you take that with you,
Right.
so, you don't have to reteach. It's just like you continue to do that. And, that changes the process. So in other words, you're able to rebuild. So I really like that, Pat, honestly, being dressed right dress, having your bed and everything, still putting your slacks on the same way. It's a process, things of that nature. So I love the fact that you said that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, and I saw it in my own daughter. I'm sorry, I saw it in my own daughter. My daughter's now a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Intelligence, and she's done. She has her mother's brains, thankfully, so she's done very, very well for herself. But I saw the change in her when she came back from just her first duty assignment in Korea. Over there for a year and a half, whatever. And, very much the attitude was keep it squared away kind of thing. It's not quite, it's not the Marine Corps, but it's still, it's more, the Air Force is more buttoned down now than I think they were when I was on active duty anyway.
Ooh, I love that. I love the fact that you said about your daughter, being a woman in the military, and that legacy, you passed it down. So she's able to make it happen for herself. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Wow. My pleasure.
Congratulations, Pat. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
That's a big deal, man. The fact that you're raising the next generation, and I hear from a lot of veterans who have mixed feelings about this next generation going into the service. And I will tell you guys, the Marine Corps changed my life. Like, the Marine Corps is one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me. Some of you might have mixed feelings about what's going on, but I will tell you, it is a life changer. It will help you learn the system. It will help you learn the country, and it'll help you appreciate a lot of things more in society. And you won't take things for granted, right? And that is, as every parent or every mentor, I think that's something that we should all just take away here. I think military service is very important. So let's real quick talk about any mentors in your career, Pat. Was there someone that stuck out to you that guided you along the way from your military service or in your corporate career?
Yeah, I mean, one of the COs later in my career, Lieutenant Colonel Wilson at the time, Lynn Wilson, he's in Oklahoma now. He retired as a full colonel. He was very supportive, and you felt you could talk to him at almost any time. I really enjoyed working for him and didn't want to ever disappoint him on things. After you get out, I worked for a bunch of different industries, but one of the gentlemen on our board, I've known him since college, actually, and I worked for him. He ran a construction company. He owned a construction company. And he was a mentor to me, even though we're about the same age, just him taking the time to teach me about that industry. And and what was important to know there. Others, yeah, I mean, I worked for a Japanese pharmaceutical company for a lot of years, and really good bosses from Japan who will support you. You establish a level of trust with them, and then pretty much until you prove differently, they're behind you 100%. So that was encouraging, and it was always a great learning experience to see it through other people's eyes.
That's awesome. And I'm sure, especially so the Japanese were known for their Lean Six Sigma, the Toyota process. And so they know business really well, especially in the 80s, which is when they flourished. And I'm very impressed by a lot of folks that I've seen come from Japan or work in Japan. They're very well seasoned, and they know a lot of things about the business world. So that seems like that was a very formidable experience for you, Pat.
Yeah, it was sometimes a little frustrating because they don't always move. They certainly don't move at the speed of the Marine Corps, and there's a lot of deliberation, a lot of research to know all of the risks involved, and to really chew on that stuff for a while. And a lot of it is management by committee kind of stuff. But every once in a while, you see a strong leader who just he swims upstream to his own tune, and people gravitate toward those people. So
that's right. Joe, any comments?
No, I was just when you talked about that, and just before you said that, Jeffrey, I actually wrote down Kaizen, right? The continuous improvement. I actually wrote it down. I was just curious, the Pat, on that same topic, do you think that because, and again, normally Japanese, their systems of production are really efficient. Do you think because they have a very efficient production system, like to produce products or produce whatever their end result is, allows them that span to deliberate more because they make up that time in the production? Or do you think they still waste time thinking? Whereas I know, because a lot of Marines and a lot of veterans, for us, it's like we're either or. And I think there's, as my transition and my experience in my journey of things, I tend to find myself sometimes getting into that I'm thinking too much. And then other times I'm just acting too quickly. I haven't,
right.
It's finding the right balance, right? But do you think because they have such an efficient production system, they are able to do that? Or
yeah, I think their production system is efficient because they have really analyzed it, and they continually analyze it and continue to make small improvements to it to make it run even better. So we tend to, I think as Americans, we set things up and let's see how it runs, and we watch it for a couple of years and then make adjustments. In Japan, they'll watch things continually, and they're always honing to do something better or find something more robust, a better part. I mean, I didn't work for an automotive company, but I read studies about, people sitting around a boardroom table with a little electrical switch, like, I don't like the way this thing clicks. I don't like the feeling of it. So just a lot of thought in the tactile arenas for certain, if that they want to know what the customer is experiencing. Because, one thing I really appreciate in Japan, and if anyone has ever shopped in a Japanese store in Japan, the customer is king. I mean, nothing's in the too hard box in a Japanese retail store. It seems, the customer is absolutely the king, and what he does is, or what he wants is, what your focus should be. So, anyway.
It looks like this conversation is firing up a whole separate thread, because I see the comments here just blowing up. We got some folks in Japan, and we got fact checker. Thank you, Larry, for holding us accountable. I guess Lean was actually started way before the Wealth of Nations. So I hope you join us for the after show so you can tell us more about it. So, Larry, excuse me, Pat, I think I want to move into let's move into this next segment because of why we're here today. But before we do that, you mentioned earlier there was a seed that was planted in you about Tun Tavern being born in a bar. Can you orient the audience today about the origin of Tun Tavern, and then let's jump into why we're here today as far as getting support for Tun Tavern.
Sure. So, like most people, I didn't know anything about Tun Tavern other than it was supposed to have been in colonial Philadelphia. I didn't know where it was. So I was really starting with a blank slate. There was a marker installed approximately where Tun Tavern stood. I didn't know that when I first started investigating this 9-10 years ago. But, you start where you can find things, and you kind of over time realize there's a lot of nonsense on the internet. But so, I'll go back to the genesis of the idea. There is a bar in South Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, it's a very large city, and South Philly is sort of residential and commercial industrial mix of things. So you have these long row homes, and at the end of a row home, there's a retail establishment, sometimes a bar, sometimes a hairdresser, sometimes a nail salon, sometimes a real estate office. It's the end of a cap of row homes. Well, this was a bar called Cookies. It was owned by the uncle of a Marine, a Vietnam Air Marine. His name was Cookie, his nickname. And it was just a little hole in the wall, 11-seat tavern, sticky floor, everything else. And so the Marine bought the tavern from his uncle. His name was Wagner. And he was frustrated there was no big celebration in Philadelphia on November 10th. So he started to invite his Marine friends from the Vietnam era to his bar called Cookies. And as Marines will do, they told other Marines. And by the time I started going to these parties in the 90s, there were about 5,000 Marines outside this bar from all over the country. And, it's like I said, a little sticky floor, 10, 11 seat bar that the health department would shut down 3 times a year for violations. So it was not the place to take a date. It was just, and they had a funny sign up above the bar with I think they had cross rifles as a warning, we do not call 911. So it was very much a Marine bar, but, the walls were adorned with Blue Angels signed, autographs and units in Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. So, and you couldn't get in the bar. It's so tiny. So they would shut down 3 blocks of this fire break street in Philadelphia called Oregon Avenue. And, it's a 7-lane wide street, and they'll shut down for 3 blocks, and it's just packed with Marines. And, and weather doesn't matter, rain or shine. Every November 10th, it happens. And, after going to 7 or 8 of these things, I'm standing there in the rain, eating cake and drinking beer with 3,000 other jarheads. And I thought, this is crazy. They'll come to this little bar that was once owned by, the gentleman died. So it was once owned by a Marine. And we still keep coming back to this bar. And it's not just Philly Marines. They come from New York, or I met guys from Alabama, from Tennessee, from Michigan. They just send on Philadelphia for the November 10th celebration. And Philadelphia doesn't know why they're there. It's comical to see it on the news every night. It's like the big party in Philadelphia in South Philly at Cookies. And so I thought, this is crazy. And so that's what I started looking at. So what I came to learn was Tun Tavern was one of the first 3 taverns established in colonial Philadelphia in the late 1600s. When William Penn sailed up the Delaware on his ship, looking because he had been made, William Penn was a Quaker, and Quakers in England were not well liked. They were considered to be disloyal to the king. In the Quaker religion, you don't need a priest, you don't need a bishop. You certainly don't need to give your money to the church. Keep your own money and do good with your own money rather than give it to the church. Excuse me. And in England, the head of the church is the king. So as the Quaker religion grew in England, the king started to see his treasury start to shrink a little bit. As more and more people became, interested in this religion, they stopped giving to the Anglican church, which affected the treasury. And William Penn, despite his father's fame and fortune, William Penn decided to become a Quaker himself. And so he was ostracized from his family. But so eventually, William, he patched things up with his father. He was put back into the family will. His father died a couple years later. He inherited a boatload of money. And one of the things he inherited was there was a guy named Cromwell who was cutting off the heads of kings in England. And so the English king escaped to France in the early 1600s, mid 1600s. And after Cromwell, in 10 years, they cut his head off. The king returned to England, and the guy who helped finance the king's return to England was Admiral Penn, William Penn's father. So the king had this huge IOU, financial IOU, to William Penn's father. His father died, so William Penn inherited this huge IOU, and it's something that it would have taken something like 240 years to pay it off or something. It was some huge amount of money. And then somebody must have told the king, you got these pesky Quakers that no one likes here anyway. You have this land in America. Why not send them there and let them set their own colony up there? And the idea was pitched to Penn, and this would clear the debt. This, I'll give you this land in exchange for the IOU. You're the governor. You develop it in any way you see fit. And, you sell the land and keep developing Pennsylvania, and you can bring all your Quaker friends there and make your own rules, and you'll still be under the protection of the British Crown. So William Penn sailed to the Delaware Bay, came up the bay, stopped at the first English settlement he saw, which was Chester, stepped off the boat and said, "I'm your new governor." And they said, "Penn, the Quaker, right? No, you're not our governor. Keep moving." So he got back on his boat and went further up the Delaware a few miles and saw this bluff overlooking a turn of the river. And he said, "I'll put my city up there." And up there is where Philadelphia stands. Front Street is on a 40-foot cliff. So if you drive on 95 going north to south, as Penn was doing, south to north, you'll go under a couple of underpasses, and on your left, it's a concrete wall now, but that's covering the bluff that William Penn saw. And I say that because the bluff was caused by a turn in the river, which chewed away at the hill, and all that sediment fell onto a beach. The beach is where Tun Tavern was. So essentially, it was called Water Street, initially King Street, but Water Street was about 40 feet below Philadelphia, and they had steps up to the top of the bluff there where most of the city then thrived. But for the first 30 to 50 years of Philadelphia, Water Street was the big, busy, that was the street in Philadelphia. So Tun Tavern was one of the first 3 taverns opens on Water Street. And William Penn liked beer. Tun Tavern was actually built by a gentleman from Barbados who was himself a Quaker. In Barbados back in the 1600s, or in the world in the 1600s, the oil of the day was sugar. It wasn't the white powdery cocaine, it was white powdery sugar. And people were making fortunes in sugar because Europe had a real sweet tooth. Barbados made some of the best sugar cane in the world. This Quaker gentleman made a killing as a sugar merchant in Barbados. And after they kept burning his warehouses because he would not let his men join the local militia because they were Quakers, he cashed out of Barbados, took his money, and went up to see William Penn in this new colony. His timing was perfect because Penn had all this land and no money, and his name was Carpenter, and Carpenter had all this money and no land. So the two formed a partnership. Carpenter bought big tracts of Pennsylvania, which is named for William Penn's father, by the way, not for William Penn. Most Pennsylvanians don't even know that, because William Penn's father made this whole deal possible. Carpenter built the first pier into the Delaware River, and at the end of the pier, he built a tavern. And his brother was a master brewer, Joshua Carpenter, and he became famous for brewing the best beer in Philadelphia at the time. And I think the name Tun Tavern was sort of a default because a ton, as most people know, is a large cask to hold beer. Holds about 250 gallons of beer. It weighs right around 2,000 pounds. So I think that's where our modern TON, ton, comes from. It's a rather large barrel. I actually went to a barrel maker here in the local Philadelphia area. There are still a few that repurpose wine barrels. And he had a ton. He says, yeah, we have 1 ton. It's over there. He pointed to it. And it was substantially larger than every other barrel there. And these were, 50-gallon barrels. So I think there were tons all over the place at the time. And so they just called it the Tun Tavern, and the name stuck. And it's like anything else. It held the name Tun Tavern, even though the ownership changed over the years. It was always still Tun Tavern. It had other names. When the Mullen family, Robert Mullen, the second Marine, it was known as Mullen's Tavern back then. But still, people kept calling it Tun Tavern. So it's probably like the White House. The official name is the Executive Mansion, but everyone calls it the White House. So I knew where Tun Tavern stood. I knew that 95 had now covered it because they went through and scraped it all clean and put 95 where that Water Street had been. And so I started looking around at what else happened at Tun Tavern. I discovered it was the first Masonic lodge in North America. The Freemasons, everyone knows that, with the Masonic symbols, it's basically a fraternity. And Tun Tavern, there's some dispute about other lodges being formed in North America. Tun Tavern, or the Tun Tavern Lodge, holds that claim because they actually have the record book of who attended the meetings. So they have the oldest recorded meeting record book of any lodge in North America. So, as for proof, Tun Tavern Lodge seems to be the oldest lodge in America. So it's the home of the Pennsylvania Freemasons. They see it that way. The Masonic fraternity is not organized like the military. Each state has its own independent groups of Freemasons. There's no overlording central command, as it were. And there's also 3 benevolent societies, one for the English, the Society of St. George, because a lot of people were getting off the boat at Tun Tavern and showed up with no money and no job, very little in the way of worldly goods. So the English that were already here decided, let's help them get started. And then the Scotch did the same thing, the Society of St. Andrew, to help indigent Scotsmen showing up. And the Irish did the same thing with the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. And all 3 of those organizations would meet at Tun Tavern for their fundraisers. There's actually the St. Andrews, the Scots group, has the menus for one of their fundraisers that was printed by Benjamin Franklin. And he attended. Apparently, he drank so much that he broke some furniture, and they sent him a bill for the furniture, which he never paid for. But they have some pretty interesting things in their archives.
That sounds like a Benjamin Franklin type of thing, because I thought he was pretty frugal in his life. So the fact that he didn't pay it back, that sounds like something right here. So there's a lot of history. What I'm gathering here, Pat, and the Marine Corps is a big part of this history, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, the Marine Corps was sort of the last guy in. After those organizations I already mentioned, when John Adams was appointed the head of the Naval Committee at what we call Independence Hall, was the State House back then. So he and 6 other gentlemen from the Continental Congress were tasked with, we need a Navy to help protect our small communities that the British are bombarding at will. So we need some sort of Navy to chase them off. They couldn't fight the biggest Navy in the world, but they wanted something. So they decided we'll build, 13 frigates and commission gunboats, whatever. But they didn't really know how to build a Navy. So John Adams and six or 7 other gentlemen with some experience sat down, and they wouldn't go to City Tavern, which was sort of a loyalist tavern, because they really didn't want the British to know what they were planning to do. They went to Tun Tavern, which was owned by Mullen, Robert Mullen at the time, who was an established, well-known patriot. And he rented them a room upstairs, and there they wrote the rules for the Continental Navy. It later became the U.S. Navy. So it's our opinion that the United States Navy also has roots in Tun Tavern, because the rules for the U.S. Navy were written on the second floor of Tun Tavern by this committee. And then, of course, on November 10th, 1775, Robert Mullen being the proprietor of Tun Tavern, Samuel Nicholas being the first Marine, they were both Freemason fraternity brothers. And Mullen's Tavern was right there on the waterfront. You could see the ships being built for the Navy within eyesight of the tavern. It seemed like the logical place to recruit people that would man those ships. And, my investigation of Marines at the time is kind of interesting. The sailors of the 1700s are not like the sailors today. Very often they were unskilled people, or people that were running from the law, or that it could be a pretty rough bunch. And so they wanted something between the 2 or 3 military officers and these sailors, and they were the Marines. And so the Marines were armed on the ship, and they just kept order on the ship and made sure that, essentially piracy was huge back then. So here you are, you're building a formidable gunboat, and you're loading it with ammunition, and you're sending it out with guys who maybe are not the most trustworthy in the world. Suddenly they could have their own venture started and be, profiteering on this. So I think the Marines served 2 purposes there. They operated, certainly assisted with the guns and shooting from the loft in the sailing rigs, but also keeping order on the ships.
I'm going to say this. I think the Marines were the original pirates. You can trademark that now, because that explains the Marine Corps quite a bit, right? 2 fraternity brothers starting this organization, and you got a bunch of ragtag folks that are starting this. So, man, there's so much history here. Like, I'm glad Joe's taking notes today, because I usually don't want to take notes, but it's just so much history here, and the fact that the Marine Corps and Marines around the world, it sounds like this establishment over exceeded its capacity, right? Because I think of a big block party and all these Marines getting together and in this little hole in the wall place, and you can't fit them all together. And then the cops are like, well, what do we do with all these people, right? And we're like, well, we're just here celebrating tradition and honor, right? Which is which is one thing that the Marine Corps is founded on. So I'm so glad that you are embarking on this mission, as I like to call it, and it's so symbolic, especially coming off of 4th of July, like we talked about before the show, Pat, because I look at this as a symbol of freedom, to preserve freedom and to preserve tradition and legacy, not just for the Marine Corps, but for all Americans here, as something that they could be proud of, right? So let's talk about your mission and what you're doing as the founder of the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation, and then how can we join you in this mission, Pat?
Okay, so I decided to call. So I thought about quite a long time. I did a business plan for this, and I thought, this has been attempted at least 5 times in the last 100 years to rebuild Tun Tavern. It was only successful one time, and that was for the sesquicentennial. It was called the 125th birthday of the United States, and they built a wood replica of Tun Tavern. They put it down now where the stadiums are now. It wasn't where it used to be, but and it was marketed, because I've seen the signage and in the photos from it, as the birthplace of Freemasons and the Marine Corps. So I thought, the Freemasons, there's still more Pennsylvania Freemasons than any other. I think it's the largest number of Freemasons than any other state. And the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia is like a huge cathedral. It's an amazing, amazing building. And so I thought, it can't just be Marines trying to do this, because every time Marines have tried to do it ourselves, it has crashed and burned. It has, it never got off the ground. It wasn't really questionable what happened to the money, but they just didn't have the bandwidth to get it done, and maybe didn't think it all through and thought it might be a fun project to have. But, this is a real undertaking. So I started to contact the other 5 groups, representative from them, to see if they're interested in helping us revive this. And so we built a coalition represented by all 6 organizations, and they're all represented on our board. All 6, you wouldn't call the Marine Corps and the Navy nonprofits, but it's the nonprofit side of the Marine and the Navy that are on the board. And the others are the Masonic Masonic fraternity is nonprofits. They run Shriners hospitals and things like that. The other 3 societies no longer help indigent Scotsmen, Irish, and English, but they actually fund scholarships for kids to study there or them to come here and study. So you have this opportunity to do some real good with money. So I thought Tun Tavern should be a nonprofit organization. And it should be something that we can use the profits from Tun Tavern to help fund veteran charities. So there's no one owns Tun Tavern. It's owned by the foundation itself. And every penny that the foundation makes as profit running Tun Tavern will be allotted to these different charities. We're still in the fundraising mode, and how it's going to probably pan out is as a percentage of what these groups help us raise. That in turn will reverse once Tun Tavern opens, and the money paid back out to them in the appropriate percentage. So if the Freemasons help us raise 30%, they'll get 30% of the profits from Tun Tavern on any given year or whatever that is. So that'll be figured out later. But so this whole venture is nonprofit driven. No one here is getting rich on Tun Tavern. Marines will be literally helping brother Marines. We're trying to help guys with no legs and families with no mom or dad, and guys who need help getting started. We're not starting charities. We're funding established charities that already do good work, and that's the idea.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. And I want to pitch it over to Joe, because one thing we always talk about is, and Joe talks about, this is a combined joint task force that we need, right? It's all hands on deck to get this off the ground, right? And there he has it right there, right? He has his combined joint task force. He has the notes here. This is, I believe, and we believe here at the Veterans Club, that this is something that we can help join in the mission, right? It's not just Marines here. We have Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard. Shout out to the Coast Guard. I know you guys don't get a lot of shout outs, but I'm going to give you guys a shout out here. And it's a whole team effort, right? And what Pat is embarking on, and his board and his team, is they want a place so we can celebrate tradition, right? And what I love about it is that he doesn't talk about the bottom line. He talks about the mission, which the mission is going to go help veteran homelessness, veteran suicide, or other challenges that military or veteran families have, right? That's the way he's thinking about it. He's not thinking about increasing his profits or his bottom line here, ladies and gentlemen. He wants to actually establish a place where we can all convene and talk about tradition and legacy and bring our families to it and celebrate the Marine Corps birthday at it. Now, it's my understanding, Pat, that you also have this program where you will give a Marine or someone a brick. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can, through our website, you could purchase a brick. There's 2 kinds of bricks. You can actually purchase a miniature brick, which we send framed to you with a certificate of authenticity, and sort of a tongue-in-cheek, somewhat humorous thing that says, this Marine will be welcome whenever he darkens our door at Tun Tavern. It's signed by myself and by a barfly, as we call the other board member who signs it. But it's a nice framed certificate that you get. Or you can buy a brick paver in Tun Alley. We're recreating Tun Alley beside Tun Tavern. It's very close to where the original Tun Alley stood, but that's now covered by 95. But Tun Alley will be a brick alley, and you can have a brick paver card with, I think, 4 lines of text. That's available on our website to look at that. That's a limited, well, they're both limited edition. We don't sell any more bricks to the tavern. Once all the bricks are sold for the tavern, there are no more to sell. So we're not carving your name and using that brick to build the tavern. We're giving you a replica of the representation of a brick in the tavern, because I didn't want to get the argument of, why is my brick down here? I want it up there where I can see it, kind of thing. But the pavers will be in Tun Alley, and they will continue into the structure. A little bit about the structure. We have the Tun Tavern, which we all recognize that iconic image of Tun Tavern. We are building it exactly to the scale that it was in those images, but you'd only probably fit 82 people in that. So it's not big enough. So behind it, we're building Peg Mullen's Beefsteak Club. Peg Mullen was Thomas Mullen's father, or Robert Mullen's father, Thomas Mullen's wife. In the 1740s through 1760s, Tun Tavern was known as Peg Mullen's Beefsteak Club. And it was the best place to get a meal in Philadelphia. And that's the Continental Congress statement. That's not her statement. So it was really renowned for it was a steakhouse, essentially. And so we will have a 175-seat steakhouse and oyster bar behind Tun Tavern. It'll look like a colonial warehouse. And that'll be connected with a small atrium kind of museum. We're not building a Marine Corps museum. We have one of those in Quantico, and it's great. We want all 6 organizations that come to Tun Tavern to feel like they're home, and that includes Marines. It won't be just a monument to the Marines. The Masons are a big piece of this. So every of the 6 groups, all of them will see some reference to their heritage at Tun Tavern, and they will be, to all of them, it'll be a place to come home to. It's not going to be in-your-face Marine Corps stuff everywhere. And it shouldn't be, because it was a mariner's tavern that these groups used for their own purposes. It was one of the earliest taverns built, and it was clearly, it's when you read the old newspapers in Philadelphia from the early 1700s and late 1600s, you could often meet a ship's captain in Tun Tavern. He would advertise, "I'll be at Tun Tavern if you need a ride to Barbados or back to England or whatever. My ship leaves on Tuesday." So it was a place to book passage all around the world. And it's kind of a place where people went to talk to people who just came from Europe or Africa or India or the Caribbean to learn the news of the world. So it was quite a place. And shout out to the Army. When George Washington was elected to lead the Continental Forces against the British, everyone did their huzzah at Independence Hall, and then they went to Tun Tavern to have his celebratory dinner. So that's where he uttered his famous words to Patrick Henry that, "I feel this may be my undoing," or whatever, that, he's now in charge of leading a ragtag army against the biggest military in the world. And, what chance do we have? And here's the little piece of trivia. Why did they go to Jamaica in their first amphibious raid? And this was a revelation to me when I started learning, reading this stuff, and why it goes back to Lexington and Concord. I was like, what's that have to do with Barbados or I'm sorry, Jamaica? It's because the King of England realized that things were not going well in the colonies in the 1770s. And these guys in the colonies, they have their own muskets and they can make their own shot, but they can't make gunpowder. We make gunpowder here in England and we send it to North America. So let's stop sending it to North America. Let's send the gunpowder to safe places like Bermuda and Jamaica, where these guys can't get their hands on it. So the colonists started buying gunpowder illegally from the French and the Dutch and hiding it. And they hid it in some of the places like Concord or Lexington, whatever, in Concord, actually. And that's why the British marched to Concord through Lexington to get that gunpowder. They didn't want colonists to have gunpowder. There was a very large store of gunpowder down in the Bahamas. And that's why the ship left Philadelphia with 144 Marines or something and sailed south to the Bahamas and raided there and got gunpowder and the cannons in the fort and brought them back for George Washington. Because that's what kept Washington awake at night. They had something like 11 shots per man, and they were going to face the biggest army in the world. And they only had 11 shots per militiaman. So he didn't know where he was going to get gunpowder. So that was the single biggest fear he had. So, yeah, the Army has a interesting little hold or a little connection to Tun Tavern as well. That's where George Washington went to celebrate his anointing as a commander-in-chief of the Army.
So much history. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, real quick, there is a website for the Tun down here below me, and then there's a QR code next to Patrick that you can scan with your phone if you want to contribute to this mission or you want to learn more about the mission. Again, this is a combined joint task force. This is all hands on deck effort. When are you looking to have this the ribbon cutting ceremony? What is your vision for, like, what is your end state, Pat?
Well, on November 9th of this year, with the help of our Masonic partners, there will be a black tie fundraiser event at the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia. We're trying to get some Hollywood Marines to show up for that, and other notables. So that'll go on November 9th. The following date, November 10th, we will have the groundbreaking at the site for Tun Tavern. And we are collecting e-tools right now. So if Marines want to help us dig the foundation for Tun Tavern, they can grab an e-tool, jump down in the pit there, and take out a few shovelfuls of dirt. And we'll even give them a souvenir and a little certificate that says they helped dig the foundation for Tun Tavern. So it'll be a block party, rain or shine. 2nd Street will be cordoned off. And so this will be on 2nd Street, which is right around the corner from where Tun Tavern stood. So
perfect. So breaking ground on 10 November. And then when is the Tun going to be potentially open?
It may not be completely finished by November 10th, 2025, the 250th birthday of the Marine Corps, but enough of it should be standing if the money continues to come in, because this is a very expensive project. None of us are wealthy individuals. We're all, we've all contributed, let's just say, a lot of money to this, but we need another $15 million. We do own the land. That was a big lift for us. That was a $4.5 million purchase, but we own the land that Tun Tavern will stand on, which is no small feat in that section of Philadelphia. It's the oldest section of Philadelphia. It's probably the most expensive land, but it's literally a 4-minute walk from where Tun Tavern stood. There's a little alley next to it, Black Horse Alley. It's the original cobblestone alley from the 1600s. That's on the maps that showed Tun Tavern way back when. So we're looking for major corporate support. And by that, I mean, defense contractors would be huge. If they could help us do this, if anyone has an in on how to get to defense contractors, their name will be on a shiny brass plaque at the door saying this was constructed with the help of, you name the contractor. There are naming opportunities besides the bricks. There are rooms that can be purchased. There's all sorts of things that can be named. We're not trying to make this too much of a commercial enterprise, but this is all bootstrap funding, and no one wants to loan you money to build a bar, and especially Marines. You don't have to explain this project to Marines, but no one else seems to understand why you'd want to build a bar. Marines get it, and if I could find Marines in defense industry positions, that would probably help us get this thing really jump started.
Copy that. So, wow, there's a lot. So I will tell it, if you are a small business or you have contacts, please reach out to myself or Pat. If you want to be a part of the process, or if you can help with sponsorships, or if you want to learn more about it, like I said, set up a conversation with Pat and learn about this mission here. Like, this is something that your children and your children's children will visit one day, and they don't have to be Marines. They don't have to have joined the service, but it's an opportunity to preserve tradition and legacy, which is what the Marine Corps was building on. And then historically, as Pat just talked about, right? George Washington has a stake there, right? Shout out to the Army as well, right? We just celebrated our independence. The Marine Corps was part of that independence, and we want to preserve that. And we think this is a big piece of American history. So, Patrick, I just want to thank you again. I hope you join us at the after show, because we got a lot of comments and questions, and our audience would love to meet you here. I am going to open the floor for any last questions or comments from our amazing co-host. Over to you guys.
I just wanted to say I think that the success in this is the idea that you've actually collaborated. You've combined other organizations that have been a part of the history of Tun Tavern, and not typical Marine and just charge the hill alone.
Right.
And I think that is a great lesson for all of us that watch the show, that are on our own missions, that are on endeavors. It truly does take a group, and sometimes we have to step outside of that original group that we think we need to be a part of and just expand that. So that's one of the biggest parts that I love, and it also is a testament to the idea of what we learned: the teamwork, the synergy, the being better than ourselves, like just having one sole purpose.
And it is interesting because I'm sorry to interrupt, but it is interesting because these other groups don't look at the Tun Tavern the way Marines look at Tun Tavern. It's a completely different thing to them. It has very little to do with Robert Mullen and raising battalions of Marines or whatever. No, it's where they gathered for banquets to raise money to help immigrants coming to America.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the Freemasons met to do their Masonic membership drives and that sort of thing. So that
was another kind I wanted to bring up the Masons. Like I've actually have met quite a few guys that are a part of that organization, and from all over different places, and there's a commonality among them, and it's a generosity and a kind of like I think something there, they really do talk about caring for the community. They really do take a lot of action that you don't know about, that they don't.
That's exactly right.
And really empowering the communities, and doing amazing projects, really cool projects.
Yeah. Very quiet charity work. Yeah.
It's really is interesting, and I wish more people would kind of learn a little bit more about them, because there is some great value in that realm, generosity and giving back to the community. So.
Yeah, they do a tremendous amount of very quiet, charity work that is not publicly well known. But here on the East Coast, everyone knows Shriners Hospitals, but and that's where children go for free treatment. And that's fully funded by Masonic fraternity. So,
Lakeisha?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just so excited, just this fact that you are a part of this mission, just to really revive, this experience for not just Marines, but for all soldiers. Definitely. I'm inspired. I'm inspired by the story. I'm inspired by the mission. I'm inspired by the legacy that it's going to continue to prevail, so I'm looking forward to the opening. I'm looking forward to the collaboration effect of everybody coming together. And I really believe that the mission truly is going to stand the test of time, definitely with the Tubs. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And I'm with you. Definitely. This scary woman. That's a woman.
Thank you.
For the whole mission.
And actually, I will say that in Tun Tavern's golden years were the years it was run by women. And its best years. There was 2 women who ran at different times. And they were the most successful years. Peg Mullen being one of those 2 women. Yeah, it's historically documented. They were the best years, the golden years of Tun Tavern. And, it didn't burn down, as is often read on Wikipedia. It was pulled down because by the 1781, it was almost 100 years old. And the land was worth more than the tavern that stood on the land. And so that someone bought it with the intent of demolishing it and building something else, which they did. So, there's a lot of nonsense out there on the internet about what happened to Tun Tavern. It didn't burn down. Water Street was a very, very small street. That fire on Water Street would have been catastrophic. It would have taken out half of the city. So, and I checked all the papers, and there is some reference to it being taken down, not burned down. But anyway, that's the last thing I'll say about that.
It still lives on. Still lives on.
Yep. Thank you, Lakeisha. Appreciate that. And I do have to make a note here, ladies and gentlemen. Pat is at Ground Zero, so where he's at right now, that is the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation. You can see all the boxes. There's probably wires moving over. It's like a startup right now. He's in startup mode, and he's building it up.
shirts and mugs and everything else.
Shirts and mugs and getting all the merch and getting all the bricks. This is a very phenomenal opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. We hope that many of you join us at the after show, which is our live Q&A, where you can meet our guests and ask them the questions, ask them about the Tun and question his history, because apparently we have some fact checkers here today that were fact checking us on some of the history here. So, Pat, I will open the floor over to you one last time for any final comments, questions, anything about the show before we head over to the after show.
One other thing I neglected to mention is we are also taking donations of materials. So if someone, owns a brick company or, a plumbing supply, and they would like to donate materials, we'll put them in touch with our architects and the contractor, and we have a process for doing that. It doesn't have to be a small company. It could be someone works for someone or knows someone who works for Lowe's. I think that the president of Lowe's is a Marine, I believe. So Lowe's Home Center, that kind of stuff. It's, this is a fairly large, expensive commercial, it's my instructions to the architect, and we have the biggest architectural firm in Philadelphia working on this. They don't usually do taverns. They usually do, university campuses and 90-story high rises, but they were just so charmed by this. They actually went down to 8th and I and took in the show down there at the Silent Drill team. So they really are enthused about this thing. So my instruction to them, it has to look 300 years old the day it opens. So that's what we're driving to, repurpose barn wood and everything else. There are tankards you can purchase that will be displayed in the Tun with your name on it. There are steins hung from the rafters in the Tun. You can have your name on those as well. It's all available on the website. But this is a project for, by Marines and Freemasons and the others, for ourselves. And, this is for us. So please help us do this. There's no one wealthy individual funding this. This is all bootstrap funding.
Thank you, Pat. And again, thank you again for coming on the Veterans Club. We look forward to having an update in the near future. Veterans, if you have a small business as well, please reach out. What Pat is saying is, even if you don't have a business, or if you do, this is a tremendous opportunity to be a part of this. I think you will be contributing to history. You will be preserving legacy and tradition. So please, again, if you want more information, you can go to the website down below at the little ticker here, or you can scan the QR code right next to Pat. That will take you to the Tun Tavern website. You can learn more about it, about the bricks, and if you want to make a contribution, please do so. But this is the way I see it, as an important milestone for the city of Philadelphia and for America. So, Patrick, I want to thank you, and of course my amazing co-host today. And I have to give a shout out actually to one person who made the connection to Pat, Evan Guzman. He is the founder of the Millband Project, and he's also very involved with Veterati, which has changed the lives for a lot of veterans. Shout out to Evan Guzman. He is a game changer. He's a change maker. I appreciate him. I look forward to having him on. And again, shout out also to Sue for her impeccable strategic communications capabilities. And her and I have been talking back and forth to set up this event here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a multi-part series where we look forward to having Pat on again. And please join the mission. Scan the QR code or visit the website. And if you're going to join us at the after show, if you have questions, we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys enjoyed the rest of your 4th of July weekend. Veterans Club signing out.